Using one 8-foot 2x4, you can create a lot of useful projects. I needed a table saw sled that could hold small pieces of wood safely, while cutting them straight as well. We will also have enough wood for a useful bonus project that everyone needs in their shop, a bench hook, all from one 2x4. The only tools I used was my table saw and a drill for both these projects. This is a large crosscut sled to cut your work safely, but I want to make one that's actually made with a 2x4 that's for small parts. First thing I want to do is cut this piece down. Cut this at about a little over 3 feet, because what I'm going to do basically is get a bunch of 3/4 by 12-inch boards out of this. The main thing to think about when dealing with 2x4s are making sure they are pretty straight to begin with. Don't pick up any boards that are warped. It'll make your life a lot easier and you won't lose as much wood in the milling process. So now I just want to rip off these edges and just square up this piece, nice and straight. To get rid of the rounded edges and square up the board, I take off just the smallest amount possible and run it through the table saw. I do this to both sides. For the most part, you end up with about 3¼ inches left. I assume this amount anyway, just to be safe. Well, now that we got the pieces squared up nice, now I want to rip them. So I find it easier to change the blade to a thin kerf blade. And we're going to use the riving knife. Okay, so the blade is a little less than 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to work with slightly less than 3/4. And when you factor in the blade, I slowly raise up the blade and run the wood through. A little more each time. If you get some unevenness, you can use a hand plane or just do a little sanding. Once I have my rough lengths, I cross-cut them using a sled or a miter gauge on the table saw, or you can just use a miter saw as well. I'm making a plan for both these projects, and you can find links in the description. Because not all the wood from the 2x4 was used, I decided to make a project that is as underrated as you can get. A bench hook is a tool that you really need to try out. Not only is it easy to make, it is like having a third hand. It holds things securely and keeps your hands out of the way of the sharp things, as well as being a guide for making straight cuts. So I threw one together with the rest of the wood, which was already pretty much the perfect size. One of the things I use with the small part sled and the bench hook is to make projects like this. This is a little wooden house. I make one each year. And this one is Thoreau's cabin at Walden that he made. Not exactly, but it's roughly based on it. And so most of the parts were laser cut for the main structure. But you did all the siding and the little tiny shingle pieces with small parts that I cut both on the table saw and with the bench hook. That's the only way to really cut these parts, is with something really small. Another handy tool to cut small pieces is just cutters like this, because they will cut through this pretty easily. Although if you want them all uniform, the only way to do it is with a table saw or a bench hook and a saw. Other than that, you're also going to use, little pieces of wood to make, in this case was the lumber, and you basically are going to use chisels on top of this so you don't damage your bench. So the bench hook acts as a sacrificial piece so you don't destroy anything. Because if you're going to come down, you can basically you can kind of tap them like this and break these things into pieces, and you've got your little tiny pieces for decoration. Other than that, much of this furniture was cut and designed on the laser. I mimicked all of these pieces with the actual designs I used for real life for my son's furniture. So this is his actual desk, and this is his actual bed. I painted these green because that's what Thoreau did, the milk paint that they used in the past. And I even made the little chair, just like I made his little chair. And I've made a number of houses like this, each a little different. But basically, I always end up using these kind of bench hooks, small parts, sleds, to hold these pieces, because they're very small. And you don't want to actually put them on the table saw without some kind of holder, because it's very dangerous to cut a tiny piece of wood like this with an angle or something. But you can make angle cuts on a small part sled. So you can see with a small part like this, you can actually put this on a weird angle. And you can clamp this down, and then that piece can actually be cut. So you can take a piece like that and get exactly a very strange angle on a tiny little piece. Wouldn't do that without a sled. This sled is made up of basically a couple of rudimentary pieces. This is just a clamp. This clamp is just a block of wood with a little piece on the end. And I'm just using a T-bolt that has a little room to get out here with a little nut on top that's got a star on it. And that's all the clamp really is. Of course, you can make a sled that's larger based on the same principles. This is all the wood that's left after the 8-foot 2x4. This is basically the scraps. That's not bad. So this was two very useful projects from a pretty cheap piece of wood. This is basically Douglas fir or pine or whatever it is. And wood is fine to cut. It doesn't have to be perfect to be a really good tool. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please subscribe and stay tuned for the next project.